April 21, 2016. Paisley Park, Chanhassen, Minnesota. Just after 10 in the morning. An assistant stepped into a small private elevator, looking for the man who owned the building. He wasn't hard to find. By the time paramedics arrived, Prince Rogers Nelson, one of the most gifted musicians who ever lived, had been dead for hours. He was 57. The official cause of death took the medical examiner weeks to confirm. But the real story, the one that actually explains it, started decades earlier in a modest house in Minneapolis. And somewhere beneath that same building where he died, there was a locked vault holding thousands of songs the world had never heard. Prince Rogers Nelson was born in 1958, named after his father's jazz stage name, the Prince Rogers Trio. His father was a pianist. His mother sang jazz. Music wasn't a hobby in that house. It was simply the air. By 7, he'd taught himself piano. By his teens, guitar, bass, drums, every instrument he touched, he simply absorbed. He formed his first band, Grand Central, while he was still in high school, and even then, friends said he was already the most talented person in any room he walked into. By 19, he'd recorded a demo tape so complete, every instrument played by him alone, that record labels didn't believe one person had made it. Warner Bros. Signed him in 1978 and gave him something almost no teenager in the industry had ever been handed: full creative control over his own music. His first albums built steadily. For You, Prince, Dirty Mind, each one stranger, bolder, and more unmistakably his than the last. Critics didn't always know what to do with him. He blended funk, rock, pop, and gospel into something that hadn't existed before he made it. By 1982, the album 1999 turned him from a cult favorite into a genuine star. But nothing prepared the world for what came next. In 1984, he released both an album and a film with the same name, Purple Rain. The album sat at #1 for 24 straight weeks. The single, When Doves Cry, became the best-selling song of the entire year. At 26 years old, Prince wasn't just famous. He'd become one of the most singular artists in the history of popular music. With that success came the resources to build something almost no musician ever gets to build: his own kingdom. Paisley Park opened in 1987, a sprawling studio complex in Chanhassen, Minnesota, built so he'd never have to leave to make music again. He worked at a pace almost nobody could keep up with, often recording entire songs, start to finish, in a single overnight session. Most of what he recorded, the world never heard. He simply kept making music faster than anyone could release it. All of it went into a single vault beneath Paisley Park. Reportedly, thousands of unreleased songs, entire finished albums nobody outside his inner circle had ever heard. Even his closest collaborators said they had no real idea how much music was down there. Neither, some say, did he. But by the early 1990s, the same label that once gave him total freedom had become, in his eyes, a cage. Warner Bros. Controlled the pace of his releases and, crucially, owned the masters, the actual recordings, of everything he'd ever made for them. In 1993, he did something no major star had ever done. He changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol and refused to answer to Prince at all. The press didn't know what to call him. The artist formerly known as Prince became the only headline that fit. He started appearing in public with the word slave written across his cheek, a direct, furious message aimed straight at his own record label. To a lot of people, it looked like a very public breakdown. To Prince, It was the opening move in a fight for something almost no artist before him had won: ownership of his own work. By the time the dust settled, he'd eventually reclaimed his masters and his name, and became one of the most influential voices in music for artists' rights that followed. In February 2007, with his masters and his name finally back in his hands, he took the biggest stage in the world: the Super Bowl halftime show, in the middle of a Miami rainstorm. When a producer worried the rain might ruin the show, he reportedly just smiled and asked, "Can you make it rain harder?" He closed with Purple Rain, played in the actual rain in front of more than 70 million people, still considered one of the greatest halftime shows ever performed. What almost nobody outside his closest circle knew was what decades of those performances were doing to his body. He'd built his entire stage persona around impossibly high energy, in signature high-heeled boots, night after night, for over 30 years. By his 40s, he was reportedly living with severe hip pain, the accumulated cost of a lifetime of performing that way. For years, by most accounts, he kept performing through it rather than stop the one thing he'd built his entire life around. Friends later said he'd become dependent on prescription pain medication just to keep making it through his own shows. It was a struggle he kept almost entirely private. To the public, right up until the very end, he still looked untouchable. In January of 2016, he began what would become his final tour: piano and a microphone. No band, no dancers, just Prince, alone at a piano, reworking his own catalog from scratch. The shows were raw and unscripted, some nights running past 2 in the morning. Audiences who'd only ever seen him as a spectacle were suddenly seeing him completely alone. His last show was in Atlanta on April 7th. 2 weeks later, he was gone. On April 15, 2016, his private plane made an emergency landing in Illinois. He was treated and released the same night. At the time, it was reported as the flu, dehydration, exhaustion from touring. 6 days later, that explanation would no longer hold up. On April 21st, staff found him unresponsive in an elevator at Paisley Park. Paramedics could not revive him. The official cause of death: an accidental overdose of fentanyl, found inside counterfeit pills that had been made to look like a much weaker prescription painkiller. He likely never knew what he was actually taking. Investigators later found he had no idea the pills were counterfeit at all. He was 57 years old. The music world lost, in a single morning, one of its last true once-in-a-generation talents. Paisley Park itself went silent that day for the first time in almost 30 years. Within days, fans began gathering outside Paisley Park's gates, leaving flowers, purple balloons, and handwritten notes along the fence line. And beneath the building where he'd died, the vault everyone had heard rumors about for decades was finally opened. Estimates of what was inside ranged from thousands of unreleased songs to entire finished albums nobody alive had ever heard. In the years since, his estate has slowly begun releasing pieces of it. Session recordings, lost albums, entire eras of music the public never knew existed. Every release is a reminder of just how much more there might have been, and how much of his genius the world still hasn't fully heard. What's easy to forget, buried under the eccentricity and the headlines, is just how singular that talent really was. He wrote, played, and produced almost everything himself, on almost every instrument, for almost 40 years. He spent his life fighting to own his own name and his own music. 13 years after that elevator, the vault is still proving he was right to fight for it. This has been the Icon Files. If you want the next story, the Father, the Son, and the single gunshot that ended a soul legend's life one day before his 45th birthday. Subscribe, because Marvin Gaye is next.